Applied Magic by Dion Fortune. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Seven. Non-humans. By this term in this section, we mean in a general way every sort of sentient intelligence which is not at the time incarnated in a human body. This includes those discarnate spirits who speak through mediums, and those we call masters or inner plane adepti, not sharing in our human life, though human spirits, but we reckon them as non-human for purposes of classification. We will take the contact with beings who are not in physical bodies. We read a great deal about these contacts in medieval literature, so too have the ancients a lot to say, and today among the primitive tribes of the East and of the New World. Also, there is a good deal about it in certain sections of our own folklore, especially among the Celts. The average Anglo-Saxon is content with one non-human only, and that is the devil. So then, we are dealing with a considerable body of testimony to the contact between human beings and non-humans, and there is no smoke without fire. So, we have to consider, are there such things? Is communication possible? And if so, is it advisable under any conditions or certain conditions? Taking the broad question of other phases of evolution, there is no reason why there should not be other forms of existence than dense physical matter. To the untrained person, nothing is real but the material things he can bump into and fall over. But anyone with any experience in scientific work knows that there are unseen forces of existence on the level next removed from dense matter, which we can get at with absolute certainty. Why should there not be others just a little further on? Are we to limit ourselves to what we can see? Or are we to say that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy? We will take this for granted now to save our time, and go on to consider the nature of the non-humans. Esoteric science teaches us that there are other lines of evolution, as well as our own. Just as light and sound take up no space in our air, so these beings do not occupy space, have not got weight or mass. They interpenetrate matter, and you might walk through one, as through a ghost. They are different modes of consciousness from ours. We might see a musician in raptures, in a state of rapture at what might sound to us a mere din, because his trained ear distinguishes the sounds. So there are these other modes of existence, different from ours, and they interpenetrate ours. We contact these other modes of life only under three conditions. We have to begin to perceive in a different way. Then we find that we are meeting with beings of a kind that we did not know existed, and it is a surprising experience for both. Secondly, we may come into contact with these other beings if there is someone about who is a materializing medium and who can exude ectoplasm. Thirdly, occultists who go in for such forms of work by magical operations can invoke beings of other forms of existence into materialization. So then, we see there are conditions by which we can contact them, but it is a process out of the normal for both parties. When a human being raises consciousness to these subtle planes, he is, as it were, a ghost to the inhabitants of that plane. Therefore, when we do, we get a sense of danger, of things inimical to us. The reason being that these beings are afraid of us and on the defensive. It is different in the case of the initiated occultist who goes out into the unseen with letters of introduction, and there is a fraternal relationship. Then the consciousness of the adept moves out along well-known tracks with his credentials, and he no longer finds these planes antagonistic. He knows how to behave, and it is an entirely different matter. But these journeys are not things to be undertaken haphazardly by anyone. We can give much offense to the beings of another plane and be pushed back forcibly. The question of communication between the two planes resolves itself into the change of the levels of consciousness on our side, or the assembling of a substantial form on the other side, and in both it is essential that both shall know what they are about and observe certain precautions. And now, what manner of beings are they who are thus contacted? First, there are living dead, those whom the spiritualists usually contact when they reach the unseen. The spiritualist movement was brought into being about the same time as the modern occult movement and Christian Science. 4 big movements moved off in the last quarter of the last century: spiritualism, Christian Science and its allies, New Thought, etc., the Theosophical Society under Blavatsky, and a general stirring and movement of life in the Western esoteric tradition itself, which is much less known. Each of these had its own work to do. the spiritualists had for their work association with the human spirits of the departed who were still within Earth's sphere. They never did much outside that. Just as the occultist, working on his contacts up and down a given ray, comes in touch with beings of his ray, so the spiritualists work, and so their experience is limited. These beings are human personalities. Most of you know that the human personality endures for a while after the death of the body, going through a purgatorial experience, from there to a lower heaven to rest in a pleasant dream, then on to the second death, the death of the personality of this incarnation, including the lower mind, which is disintegrated. From this, the higher self is set free and passes some time in the higher heaven before reincarnating. The type that the spiritualist meets are beings in the lower heaven. I do not think there is any sign of beings who are functioning in the individuality. It is the function of the spiritualist movement to work with beings on these levels because its work was to break down the barrier between the living and the dead. The occultist, on the other hand, is forbidden by his conditions to have any dealings with the living dead. He opens up his contact with those of the humankind who have passed beyond the reincarnating phase of evolution, and also with some other different forms of existence, which are very interesting. So then, the occultist finds that when he is able to function in his higher consciousness, he is coming across beings of quite different kinds from himself. These are classified. We may take them as being the elemental beings. They are quite different in kind from humanity. They have no divine spark. They will be disintegrated at the end of this evolution and cease to exist, unless they can develop within themselves a spiritual nature. These beings come into existence thus. Wherever you get a series of constantly coordinating actions and reactions, you get what we call tracks in space, which remain after the activities which gave rise to them have ceased. We can compare them to the swirling of the water in a stirred-up basin. After the stirring has ceased, the swirls in the water continue for some time. These throughout nature are the basis of any beings, and on this basis develop the possibilities of response to environment and memory. Thus we gradually get the difficult concept of the building up of consciousness out of natural phenomena. The building spirits, who thus operated in the first place the great natural phenomena when they were being created, are angelic beings. They withdraw up the planes and leave the elementary consciousnesses to carry on with the stereotyped mode of reaction. These remain and develop, and we call them the creations of the created. These lives called into existence not by God, but by God's creatures, who have no power to endow them with immortal life. Whenever you get a system in nature which reacts as a unit, a mountain, a dell, a wood, you have the same system of coordinated stresses in the background, and thus come the little nature spirits, or devas, or gods of localities, which our ancestors worshipped. The same idea is at the back of different species of animals. If you have any knowledge of biology, you will know there are very simple beings, unicellular, and the generalized consciousness of these may not have a single life under its control, but many. There are certain periods in its existence when there is only a green patch on some damp surface, and this breaks up into innumerable little things. These live for a time in a free-swimming form. Then they all gather together and form a large homogeneous mass called plasmodium. What becomes of the consciousness as a unit in its free-moving form? Or take bees. The hive is the unit there, and not the bee. The unit might be called the bee angel. We get these different curious units of consciousness evolved. Next, what is the logical outcome? Higher, more developed modes of nature forces. There is a very curious occult doctrine that these beings, becoming more and more developed and coming more to resemble the types of consciousness with which we are familiar, become conscious that they are lost souls unless they can develop a spiritual nature. They seek as initiators those who have got a spiritual nature. The initiated man is the initiator of the elemental being. Humans take them as pupils and help them to develop their sparks of individual consciousness. In return for this service, the elemental beings perform services for the magician. We read of these as familiar spirits. The writers on these matters were usually the priests, and being charged by the Inquisition to inquire into it, were usually a little prejudiced. But there is a certain relationship between people who understand the inner planes and beings of another order. And there is also an involutionary relationship, very often, between those people who are naturally psychic without training and quite spontaneously come into touch with other beings. The effect of this is seldom wholesome. It has the effect of unbalancing them. It is a too intensely stimulating contact, Elementals are of a pure type, composed of one element only, whichever that may be, whereas a human being is a mixture of all. So they are too potent a stimulus to that one element in our own being, which is very apt to throw a human being off his balance, lure him to follow it, and abandon his human ways. He is taken by the fairies, or what we should call a pathology. You can see the thought control withdrawing from the physical vehicle. They hear the call of the fairies, and only an empty shell remains, insane. When the magician invokes his spirit to individual appearance, he puts himself into a circle and draws a triangle outside it and causes the spirit to manifest in this. Then he will do the banishing ritual and return it whence it came, to its own sphere. But he usually does this only for research work or to help a pathology. We must draw the distinction between the serious research worker and the person who is out for experimenting. Nothing but harm is likely to result in this latter way. What other forms of creatures are there? I have mentioned the angelic beings, the great archons, the building spirits who built up the planes of nature in the time of other evolutions. There are all manner of very lofty spiritual beings whose mode of manifestation is in nature. They are classified in different ways. We talk about the heathen who worship many gods, but in every religion there is always the being behind the gods, the father of the gods, the oversoul, a very abstract conception of a being. The gods of any system are these natural forces, called the archangels and angels in the Hebrew system, which we ourselves use. The spiritual beings have never had a material incarnation, have never descended into matter. The old tradition is that the choice was offered to the spirits whether they would remain on the inner planes, neither ascending nor descending, or descend to the depths of matter in order to rise higher than they had started from. And one lot chose one line, led by Adam, or rather Eve, and others chose the other. So the angelic hosts are our kin, and if you go far enough back, you find a time when men and angels were of one company. Thus it is possible, under certain conditions, to contact these angelic beings, but in most cases we do not contact the actual being who is very vast. We contact his ray, his emanation. If you were sufficiently rich, you could engage a great opera singer to come to your house and sing in your drawing room, but if you had only enough for a wireless set, you could hear him on the air. When we invoke the archangel Raphael, we do not expect him to turn up in person, but we do expect to feel his force, his ray. It is the same with the visions of Christ that have been seen, the vision beautiful. It is not the actual being, but tuning in on the ray, though it is the same thing for practical purposes. We need to understand these things. We are not dealing with an actual anthropological form, but with modes of consciousness, and some are so different from ours that there is no analogy. We must not think of them all as fairy figures. They are consciousnesses which are quite incomprehensible to us. In addition to all these, there is an innumerable host of thought forms, cast off from human consciousness, artificial elementals deliberately made by human beings. These last for various lengths of time, so that there is a legion of different types of beings, neither angels nor devils. The idea that all which is not physical is either divine or evil is not true. Non-humans are very much like humans, neither perfect nor omniscient, but evolving. A final point. The beings which the Kabbalists call the Qliphoth, these are demoniacal, dwelling in the kingdom of unbalanced force, which came into existence before equilibrium was established. Different types of inharmony, reinforced by the mass of evil thoughts ever since. When you touch the unseen, you are unlikely to touch the divine beings of any sphere without also touching the Qliphoth of that sphere. If you contact a Sephirah, you touch its unbalanced side also. You dare not open up a higher contact with any of these spheres unless you are able to hold down the lower. This is a great truth of the spiritual life. The initiated adept knows this. He always aims at the equilibration of these great forces. At the last, all the kingdoms of the earth and below the earth shall be redeemed. Our Lord went to preach to the spirits in prison to redeem them. They are simply misplaced force, which, when returned to its proper place, ceases to be evil. The adept may not curse the devils. He must replace them to equilibrate them. The adept never speaks of hell, but of the kingdoms of unbalanced force. The tree of life enables us to travel about on the 32 paths, which are distinct and well-trodden ways, and the adept moves about among the elemental beings with accuracy and knows where he is. He can maintain his equilibrium. What useful purpose does it serve to contact these forces? First, it is sometimes necessary for the adept to open up these conditions in order to clear up something that has gone wrong with the soul. He may have to open a sphere to operate, like a surgeon, to bring into equilibrium and return into his own sphere what has gone wrong. Also, he may operate the forces of a sphere in order to bring the concentrated forces of that sphere into his own being so that he may work with it. Thirdly, it may be he has some special work to do which he can only carry out this way. In short, to bring harmony, to intensify his own nature, and possibly for other reasons. This kingdom is of varied nature. The conditions under which communication can be rightly done are rare. There should be a distinct turning off and on of the tap, but things can be affected by these means which are otherwise impossible. Haphazard communication is more or less of a crime, and the consequences can be disastrous. Then why not keep this knowledge secret? Because there is so much of it about that it is better, probably, to see what is going on. If you bump into things in the dark, it is better to have a light to see what is happening and to bring control. These forces exist. They can be dealt with. It is well to know this, as there is already so much knowledge about.